The day my own son tried to take control of my savings, he arrived at my front door with a lawyer and a folder full of papers meant to prove I was no longer capable of managing my own life. Ethan couldn't even look me in the eyes when he said the words mental decline. His wife Vanessa stood behind him pretending to look heartbroken, while attorney Daniel Mercer slid the conservatorship documents across my kitchen table. But instead of crying, I reached for the sealed envelope beside my coffee cup and pushed it slowly toward them. "Before you destroy this family," I said quietly, "you may want to see what's inside. If you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted, I want you to stay with me for this story. And tell me in the comments, do you think family can sometimes confuse control with love? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe." 3 years before my son tried to prove I was mentally unfit, my life was painfully ordinary. And honestly, I loved it that way. I lived in the same small brick house in Columbus, Ohio, where my husband Richard and I had raised Ethan. The porch swing still creaked the same way it had 20 years ago. The maple tree Richard planted when Ethan was born still turned brilliant orange every October. Even after all these years, I still caught myself listening for Richard's truck pulling into the driveway around 5:30. Grief does strange things to silence. Sometimes it makes silence unbearable. Sometimes it becomes the only thing that feels safe. Richard died from pancreatic cancer 6 years earlier. By the end, he barely weighed more than a shadow, but even while he was dying, he worried about me more than himself. "Chris," he whispered one night from his hospice bed, "promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small after I'm gone." At the time, I thought he meant loneliness. I didn't realize he meant our own son. Richard had spent 40 years building a small construction company from the ground up. Nothing glamorous, no million-dollar empire, just honest work, roofing crews, remodeling jobs, long days, cold winters, sunburned summers. He built enough for us to live comfortably and retire with dignity. After his death, Ethan helped me sell Richard's remaining shares in the business. Combined with our retirement savings, life insurance, and careful investments, I was financially secure. Not wealthy enough for private jets or country clubs, but secure enough to sleep peacefully at night. And I was careful. I drove a 10-year-old Buick. I clipped coupons. I still compared grocery store prices like I had during our hardest years. I lived simply because that was the life Richard and I had built together. At first, Ethan admired that. The year after Richard died, my son came by almost every weekend. He fixed things around the house, changed my smoke detector batteries, took me to dinner on Sundays. Sometimes we sat on the porch drinking iced tea while he talked about work. Those were the moments I convinced myself I had done something right as a mother. Then Vanessa came into his life. The first time I met her, she hugged me too tightly and complimented my house in the kind of voice people use when they're trying not to insult something. "Oh, wow," she said, smiling carefully. "This place is so cozy." Cozy. Not beautiful, not warm, not lovely, just small enough to pity politely. Vanessa worked in luxury real estate and dressed like she expected cameras to follow her everywhere. Perfect nails, perfect hair, designer handbags I was afraid to touch. She always smelled faintly of expensive perfume and ambition. At first, I tried very hard to like her, because mothers are supposed to try. When Ethan proposed to her after only 9 months, I smiled and hosted the engagement dinner myself. I spent 2 straight days cooking: pot roast, homemade mashed potatoes, Richard's favorite peach cobbler recipe. Vanessa barely touched any of it. "Oh, I stopped eating carbs after 7, she laughed. Ethan laughed too. That bothered me more than it should have. Little things started changing after the wedding. Ethan stopped coming by alone. Then he stopped coming by often at all. Phone calls became shorter. Holidays became rushed. Birthdays became text messages instead of visits. Vanessa always had an explanation. "We're just so busy. The market's crazy right now. You know how demanding clients can be." But I began noticing something else too. Whenever money came up, Vanessa listened very carefully. One Thanksgiving, she asked how much property taxes were in my neighborhood. Another Christmas, she casually asked whether Richard had left life insurance. One afternoon, she complimented my living room furniture before asking whether the house was fully paid off. The questions never sounded aggressive. That's what made them dangerous. They sounded curious, friendly, normal. But every single question somehow circled back to finances. I remember one particular Sunday dinner about 2 years ago. Ethan and Vanessa had invited me to their new home outside Dublin, one of those enormous modern houses with ceilings too high to feel comfortable. Everything looked expensive and untouched, like a furniture showroom nobody actually lived in. Vanessa gave me a tour with visible pride. Imported marble countertops, wine refrigerator, smart lighting, heated bathroom floors. I tried not to think about how much everything must have cost. At dinner, Ethan suddenly asked Mom, "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" I looked up from my plate. "Not really. You don't need that whole house anymore." I smiled politely. "I like my house." Vanessa sipped her wine. "But imagine how much easier life would be in a retirement community. No maintenance, no stairs, no stress." "I'm doing fine." "You say that now," she replied softly. Something in her tone unsettled me. Not concern. Calculation. Ethan leaned forward. "We just worry about you." That sentence would become their favorite weapon later. "We just worry about you." At first, I ignored the discomfort growing inside me because I loved my son more than my instincts. That's the dangerous thing about motherhood. Sometimes love teaches you to dismiss warning signs. I started noticing Ethan asking more detailed questions about my finances after that dinner. Did I still manage my investments myself? Had I updated my will recently? Did I know online? Scams targeting seniors were increasing. Was I sure I could keep handling everything alone? Each question sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they felt different, like pieces moving quietly across a chessboard. One afternoon, Ethan offered to help organize my accounts online. "I work in finance, Mom. You should let me simplify things for you." I laughed lightly. "I've been paying bills longer than you've been alive." He laughed too, but his smile disappeared faster than usual. Then came the first moment that truly frightened me. I had forgotten my grocery list at home and accidentally bought the wrong coffee creamer. That was it. A harmless mistake any exhausted person could make. When I mentioned it casually during dinner, Vanessa exchanged a quick look with Ethan. "You've been forgetful lately," she said gently. Gentle voices can cut deeper than angry ones. "I'm 68, I replied. "Not brain dead." Nobody laughed. Ethan stared down at his plate, and for the very first time in my life, I felt something cold settle between me and my own child. Not distance, not misunderstanding, something far worse. Doubt. After that dinner, the comments about my memory became more frequent. At first, they were subtle enough to dismiss. "Didn't you already tell me that story, Mom? You seem tired lately. You forgot where you parked last week. Remember?" Normal things. Small things. The kind of things every human being experiences eventually. But when those moments are repeated often enough, especially by people you love, They begin to crawl into your mind like termites into wood. You start questioning yourself. I hated that feeling. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Ethan came over alone while I was organizing old photo albums in the living room. I remember because Richard's favorite jazz record was playing softly in the background. Ethan picked up a framed photograph from the shelf. It was from his high school graduation. Richard had his arm around him, both of them grinning like life was simple back then. "Dad would have wanted you to let me help more," Ethan said quietly. The sentence caught me off guard. With what? With everything. I closed the photo album slowly. "I'm managing fine. You don't have to prove anything anymore." There was something strange in his voice. Not warmth, not concern. Patience. The kind adults use with frightened children. "I'm not proving anything," I replied carefully. Ethan sat down across from me and folded his hands together. "Mom, have you thought about adding me to your bank accounts?" The room went completely silent. Even the jazz music suddenly felt too loud. "Why would I do that in case something happens? What kind of something?" "You know." He shrugged. "At your age, things can change fast." I stared at my son for several seconds. "When your father got sick," I said slowly, "I handled every hospital bill, every insurance form, every mortgage payment, and every tax document while barely sleeping for months. I think I can still manage my checking account." His jaw tightened slightly. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He exhaled heavily like I was being difficult on purpose. "You always assume the worst now." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. Not because it hurt, because it wasn't true. I wasn't assuming the worst. I was beginning to see it. Over the next few months, Vanessa's behavior became more obvious too. At church luncheons, she started speaking for me before I could answer simple questions. "Oh, Christine gets overwhelmed easily now. She's been forgetting appointments. Poor thing, aging is so hard." Poor thing. I cannot explain the humiliation of hearing someone discuss you like you're fading away while you're sitting right there beside them. One Sunday after service, my friend Linda Carter pulled me aside near the parking lot. Linda had known me since I was 23 years old. She was one of the few people left who remembered me before I became someone's wife or someone's mother. "Honey," she whispered carefully, "I need to ask you something." My stomach tightened immediately. "What is it?" Linda glanced toward Vanessa, who was standing across the parking lot talking to another church member. "She's been telling people you're struggling mentally." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" she said. "Ethan's worried you're becoming forgetful and stubborn." I laughed softly in disbelief. Stubborn Linda didn't laugh back. She also mentioned you might need supervision soon. The word supervision hit me like ice water. Not help, not support. Supervision, as if I were becoming dangerous. I drove home shaking that afternoon. For the first time in my life, I locked my front door and sat in silence wondering whether my own child was slowly turning people against me. Then things got worse. One evening, Ethan invited me to dinner at their house again. Vanessa had cooked salmon and asparagus, though she spent most of the meal on her phone answering emails. Halfway through dinner, Ethan casually asked Mom, "Have you ever considered assisted living communities?" I nearly dropped my fork. "I beg your pardon. There are really beautiful places now," Vanessa added quickly. "Luxury apartments, medical staff activities. I'm not moving into assisted living." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "You don't have to react like that." "How exactly should I react?" "We're talking about the future." "No." I said firmly. You're talking about getting me out of my own home. Vanessa sighed dramatically. Christine, nobody's attacking you. That was another phrase she loved. Nobody's attacking you. Usually she said moments after doing exactly that. Ethan leaned closer to me. You're isolated here. I have friends. I have neighbors. I have a life. You spend most days alone. So do millions of retired people. That's not healthy. I stared at him in disbelief. You think independence is unhealthy? No, he snapped suddenly. I think pretending you're younger than you are is unhealthy. The silence after that sentence felt radioactive. Vanessa looked down at her plate immediately. Even she seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. I pushed my chair back slowly. I think I should go home. Mom. No. My voice shook and I hated that it did. You don't get to speak to me like I'm already gone. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the front door while my chest burned with humiliation. But just before I reached the hallway, I heard Vanessa's voice from the dining room. Quiet. Whispered. But clear enough. She's getting harder to handle. I froze. Ethan answered so softly I almost missed it. We just need more documentation. Documentation. Not conversation. Not care. Documentation. I drove home crying so hard that night I had to pull over twice. I kept replaying every strange interaction from the previous year. Every question about money. Every comment about memory. Every suggestion that I was fragile. Suddenly all of it connected. This wasn't concern. It was preparation. A week later, Ethan came by unexpectedly while I was watering flowers on the porch. He acted cheerful, almost overly casual. Hey, Mom. I nodded cautiously. He glanced around before speaking again. You know I love you, right? The question immediately made me nervous. Because people rarely say that before honesty. They say it before manipulation. Of course, I answered. He shoved his hands into his pockets. I just think you should trust me more. With what? With your future. There it was again. Not your happiness, not your well-being. Your future. As if my future had become a financial project. I set the watering can down carefully. Ethan, I said quietly, are you trying to take control of my finances? His face changed instantly. Not outrage. Not shock. Panic. Only for a second. Then it vanished. That's ridiculous. But he answered too fast, and in that moment, standing on the porch, Richard built with his own hands 40 years earlier, I realized something that terrified me more than aging itself. My son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as access. The first official sign that something was truly wrong came from my bank. It was a Thursday morning in early March. I remember because freezing rain tapped against my kitchen windows while I was making oatmeal. My phone rang just after 9. Mrs. Adams, a woman asked politely. This is Karen from Franklin Community Bank. I smiled automatically. Good morning, Karen. There are just a few routine questions regarding your account security. Something in her tone immediately made my stomach tighten. What kind of questions? Well, she hesitated. We received an inquiry requesting information about account oversight and financial competency procedures. I gripped the edge of the counter. I'm sorry, I said slowly. Who made that inquiry? I'm afraid I can't disclose that. Of course she couldn't. But I already knew. After hanging up, I stood motionless in my kitchen for almost a full minute. The oatmeal burned in the pot while memories started connecting themselves inside my head like puzzle pieces. The questions, the comments, the concern, the pressure, and now, the bank. That afternoon, I drove straight to Linda Carter's house. Linda opened the door wearing fuzzy slippers and reading glasses, holding a half-finished crossword puzzle in one hand. The moment she saw my face, her expression changed. What happened? I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. They contacted my bank. Linda went completely still. Oh no. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything about the phone call. The more I spoke, the colder I felt. Linda listened quietly, then removed her glasses. Christine, she said carefully, there's something else I didn't want to tell you before because I hoped I was overreacting. My chest tightened. What? A few weeks ago, I overheard Vanessa talking after church. I stared at her. She said Ethan was preparing paperwork. The room suddenly felt too small. What kind of paperwork? She didn't say exactly, but she mentioned attorneys. Attorneys. I looked down at my trembling hands. I had spent months convincing myself maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was sensitive because I missed Richard. Maybe Ethan was simply worried about me. But lawyers do not get involved because someone forgets coffee creamer. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. You need to protect yourself. The word yourself nearly made me cry, because mothers are trained to protect their children, not defend themselves from them. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual. The refrigerator humming, the floorboards creaking, wind brushing against the gutters outside. At 2 a.m, I got out of bed and walked into Richard's old office. I hadn't changed much since he died. His leather chair still sat beside the desk. His framed contractor license still hung on the wall. Even his reading lamp remained exactly where he left it. I sat there in the dark for a long time. Richard. I whispered what happened to our son, but silence was the only answer grief ever gives. The next week brought something even worse. I opened my mailbox one afternoon and found a thick certified envelope from a law office downtown. The return address read, Mercer and Reed Family Law Associates. My hands went numb before I even opened it. Inside was a formal notice requesting an evaluation regarding my capacity to independently manage financial responsibilities. I had to read the sentence 3 times before it fully registered. There was additional language referencing concerns raised by immediate family members. Immediate family members. Not strangers. Not distant relatives. My son. I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at those papers until the sun went down. The humiliation was indescribable. Not because I feared losing money, because someone who once held my hand crossing streets now wanted the law to treat me like a confused burden. The next morning, Ethan showed up unexpectedly, almost as if he already knew I'd received the documents. He entered carrying coffee from my favorite cafe, smiling carefully. Morning, Mom. I didn't invite him in. You hired a lawyer. His smile disappeared immediately. Can we sit down? No. He sighed heavily, like this was difficult for him too. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. He rubbed the back of his neck before speaking. We're concerned. There it is again. What that word, concerned, always concerned, never honest. Mom, please don't make this ugly. I actually laughed at that. Ugly. As though this situation had somehow become ugly because I noticed it. You contacted my bank. That was just procedural. You filed legal paperwork questioning my mental fitness. We haven't filed anything yet. Yet. That single word made my heart pound. I stared at him in disbelief. How long have you been planning this? His jaw tightened. You're twisting everything." "No, Ethan. I think you are." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I will never forget. "You don't realize how vulnerable you've become. Not you might become. Not someday. Already." As if he'd decided it for me. I crossed my arms tightly. "And who decided that we're trying to help you? By taking control of my finances, by protecting you before something bad happens." I looked directly into his eyes. "And if nothing bad is happening," he looked away first. That terrified me more than anything else, because guilty people rarely maintain eye contact. Before leaving, Ethan placed the coffee cup carefully on the counter. "You should really cooperate with this process," he said quietly. "Process. Not conversation. Not family. Process." After he left, I opened the certified envelope again and read every line carefully. Buried near the bottom was the name of the attorney representing Ethan. Daniel Mercer. Even I recognized it immediately. Mercer had a reputation in Columbus for handling aggressive elder guardianship cases. Richard and I had read articles about him years earlier after a local scandal involving a wealthy widow. The man was ruthless. Suddenly, this situation no longer felt emotional. It felt strategic, legal, calculated. That same evening, I received another shock. While organizing paperwork in my home office, I discovered a printed packet tucked accidentally inside a stack of junk mail near my front door. At first, I assumed it belonged to Ethan. Then I saw my name typed across the top. Petition for temporary financial conservatorship. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. The document included notes about forgetfulness, confusion, emotional instability, and inability to manage finances safely. I flipped pages faster and faster while my pulse thundered in my ears. One section referenced an incident where I had accidentally taken nighttime cold medicine during the afternoon. Another mentioned my grocery store confusion. Another referenced increasing social withdrawal. Tiny, ordinary moments, distorted into evidence. I suddenly understood something horrifying. They had been building this case quietly for months. Every harmless mistake, every tired moment, every emotional reaction, collected, documented, weaponized. I sank into the chair and burst into tears. Not delicate tears, the kind that leave your chest aching afterward. Because no matter how old you become, there is something uniquely devastating about realizing your child has started studying your weaknesses instead of protecting them. Late that night, Linda called to check on me. I finally told her everything. When I finished, she spoke with a firmness I hadn't heard before. "Christine, listen to me carefully." I wiped my face silently. "You are not helpless." For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not comfort, something stronger, anger. And somewhere beneath that anger, something else slowly began waking up too. Survival. Once I realized Ethan and Vanessa were quietly building a legal case against me, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Tiny things, cold things, calculated things, like how Ethan suddenly repeated questions during conversations. "What day is your doctor appointment again? Didn't you already pay that electric bill? Are you sure you remembered to lock the garage?" At first glance, the questions sounded harmless, but then I began catching him watching me after I answered, observing, evaluating, like he was taking mental notes. One afternoon, he stopped by while I was organizing tax paperwork at the dining room table. He walked in carrying his phone loosely in his hand. I wouldn't realize until later that he was recording me. "I can help with those," he said casually. I've managed taxes for 40 years. You don't have to get defensive. I looked up sharply. I wasn't defensive. He gave a small shrug and sat down. You just seem stressed lately. There it was again, always steering the conversation toward instability. I tried changing the subject. How's work? He sighed dramatically. Busy. Vanessa's exhausted too. Then he glanced at the paperwork spread across my table. Mom. How many accounts do you actually have? I folded one of the documents closed. Enough. You know I'm only trying to make things easier. For who? His smile disappeared for half a second. That was becoming a pattern too. Whenever I resisted even politely, something dark flashed across Ethan's face before he forced himself calm again. I remembered Richard once telling me something about business negotiations. The most dangerous people, he said, are the ones who act patient while feeling entitled. At church, the atmosphere around me started changing too. People became strangely careful with me, overly gentle, overly helpful. One woman I'd known for 15 years suddenly insisted on walking me to my car after Bible study. Another quietly asked whether I was doing all right emotionally. As if I'd become fragile overnight. I finally understood Vanessa had been talking, spreading concern disguised as compassion. And the worst part? It was working. One Sunday after service, I overheard two women whispering near the coffee station. I heard her sons really worried. Well, dementia can start subtly. She seems normal to me. That's what they always say at first. I stood frozen behind the hallway corner listening to strangers discuss my mind like I was already disappearing. I drove home fighting tears so hard my chest hurt. That evening I sat alone in Richard's old recliner, staring at the television without actually watching it. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How does a child become capable of this not angry rebellion? Not distance. Not selfishness. This, the slow destruction of someone's credibility. The answer arrived 2 days later in the form of a small kitchen accident. I dropped a glass pitcher while reaching for it in the cabinet. It shattered across the floor, sending iced tea and broken glass everywhere. My first instinct was embarrassment. My second was fear. Not because of the mess, because Ethan happened to arrive 10 minutes later. He stepped inside while I was still cleaning up. What happened? Nothing. I dropped a pitcher. His eyes immediately scanned the floor. Were you dizzy? No. Did you lose balance? No, Ethan. Did you cut yourself? It was an accident. But he was already looking around the kitchen with that same evaluating expression. Then he pulled out his phone. That's when something inside me snapped. Are you documenting me now? His face changed instantly. What? You heard me. I'm checking messages. No, I said quietly. You're collecting evidence. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then Ethan sighed heavily like I was exhausting him. This is exactly what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? You're becoming paranoid. That word hit me like a slap. Paranoid. Because once someone convinces others you're mentally unstable, every emotional reaction becomes more proof. Anger becomes instability. Fear becomes confusion. Defending yourself becomes irrational behavior. I suddenly realized the trap I was standing inside. And Ethan knew it too. That night, Linda came over with chicken soup and cornbread because she said I sounded tired on the phone. The moment she walked in, she knew something was wrong. What happened? I told her about the broken pitcher, about Ethan's phone, about the word paranoid. Linda listened silently before saying something that chilled me. They're trying to provoke reactions. I looked at her. What if they can make you emotional, overwhelmed, forgetful, or angry in public? They can frame it as instability. The room fell quiet, because deep down I already knew she was right. The following week proved it even more clearly. Vanessa invited several extended family members to dinner at their house. Cousins. Ethan's Aunt Carol. A few people I hadn't seen in months. The entire evening felt staged. Vanessa kept steering conversations toward aging. Memory care is so important nowadays. Older people get targeted online constantly. I read loneliness accelerates cognitive decline. Every sentence was aimed at me without directly mentioning me. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Aunt Carol asked innocently, "Christine, are you still driving everywhere yourself?" Before I could answer, Vanessa jumped in. "We're actually a little worried about that." I felt every eye at the table shift toward me. Ethan looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. That silence hurt worse than Vanessa's words. Because silence can be agreement. "I've never had an accident," I said firmly. Vanessa smiled sympathetically. "Of course, but these things can happen suddenly." Suddenly, like I was a ticking clock. I looked directly at Ethan. "You really believe this?" He rubbed his jaw nervously. "We just think maybe you need more support." "Support," I repeated quietly. Nobody spoke. I pushed my chair back slowly. "I think I should go home." Vanessa immediately put on her concerned expression. "Christine, please don't get upset." There it was again. Every emotion I expressed became evidence. I grabbed my purse with shaking hands. As I walked toward the front door, I heard Vanessa whisper something to Aunt Carol. She gets overwhelmed very easily now. I nearly turned around, nearly screamed, nearly shattered every plate in that fake beautiful dining room. But I didn't. Because for the first time, I understood something critical. They wanted emotional reactions, so I gave them silence instead. When I got home, I sat in my parked car for almost 20 minutes, staring at my dark front porch. I had never felt so alone in my entire life, not even after Richard died, because grief is cruel, but betrayal is personal. I finally went inside and checked my voicemail. There was one new message. It was Ethan. "Mom," he said carefully, "I know tonight was difficult, but we're only doing this because we love you." I listened to the message 3 times, and suddenly I started crying again. Not because I believed him, because part of me realized he might actually believe himself. That's what terrified me most. Not greed alone, but the human ability to rename control as love until even the people causing harm stop recognizing it. The next Sunday after church, I sat alone in my car watching families laugh together in the parking lot. Children hugging parents, grandchildren running between cars. Normal life, normal love. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to admit a truth I had been avoiding. I was losing my son. Maybe I already had. The morning I decided to stop reacting emotionally was the morning I started fighting back. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, strategically, like Richard would have. I woke before sunrise and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a cup of black coffee. For the first time in months, I forced myself to stop thinking like a wounded mother and start thinking like someone under attack. Because that was the truth. This was not a misunderstanding anymore. It was a legal strategy. And if Ethan and Vanessa were documenting me manipulating conversations and building a case, then I needed to protect myself with facts instead of feelings. So I made a list. Every strange interaction, every comment, every witness, every incident they had twisted into evidence. By the time the sun came up, I had written 7 full pages. At the top of page 1, I wrote 3 words in large letters, "I am not crazy." Then I called an attorney. Linda gave me the name of Rebecca Sloan, a family law specialist downtown who had handled elder abuse cases before. I almost canceled the appointment twice before going because some stubborn part of me still felt ashamed. Ashamed. Imagine that. My own son was trying to take control of my life, and somehow I still felt embarrassed for defending myself. Rebecca Sloan's office sat on the 12th floor of a gray office building overlooking downtown Columbus. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, sharp navy blue suit, calm eyes, the kind of woman who noticed details before people realized they mattered. She greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Adams, please come in." I sat carefully across from her desk while my hands trembled slightly. Rebecca didn't rush me. That mattered more than she probably realized. Because when people think you're unstable, you start becoming afraid of every pause, every forgotten word, every emotional reaction. You become afraid of yourself. I handed her the conservatorship paperwork silently. She read for nearly 10 minutes without speaking. The longer she stayed quiet, the tighter my chest became. Finally, she set the papers down. "Have you ever been diagnosed with dementia or cognitive impairment, pneumonia, any neurological conditions known? Have you ever missed major financial obligations? Never." Rebecca leaned back slightly. "Mrs. Adams, I'm going to be very direct with you." I braced myself. "This petition is aggressive." The word aggressive strangely comforted me because it confirmed I wasn't imagining the severity of this situation. Rebecca folded her hands together. "But I also see weaknesses." I stared at her. "What kind of weaknesses? The allegations are subjective. Most examples listed here are ordinary age-related moments unless they can establish an actual pattern of incompetence." My eyes filled with tears instantly. Not from sadness. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. For months I had been slowly absorbing their version of me. Forgetful. Fragile. Declining. Hearing someone objective say otherwise felt like breathing again after being underwater too long. Rebecca continued calmly. "You need an independent cognitive evaluation immediately." My stomach tightened. "A mental test." A full neurological and cognitive assessment from a licensed physician. The idea terrified me more than I expected, because deep down Ethan's accusations had already planted doubt inside me. What if I failed something? What if stress made me forget answers? What if age had quietly started taking pieces of me without my noticing? Rebecca seemed to read my fear immediately. "Mrs. Adams," she said gently, "healthy people usually don't question themselves this deeply." I laughed weakly through tears. 2 days later, I sat inside Dr. Howard Bennett's office for the evaluation. It lasted almost 4 hours. Memory exercises, problem-solving tests, financial reasoning questions, language assessments, attention tasks. At one point, Dr. Bennett asked me to explain how I would respond to suspicious banking activity. I nearly laughed. "If my son is involved," I said dryly, "I'd hire an attorney." He smiled slightly. By the end of the appointment, I was emotionally exhausted. Dr. Bennett reviewed his notes quietly before looking up at me. "Mrs. Adams, your cognitive function is excellent." I stared at him. Excellent. Yes. I started crying immediately, harder than I had in months. Not because I doubted myself completely, but because fear can slowly poison your confidence even when you know the truth. Dr. Bennett handed me tissues kindly. Stress can mimic confusion sometimes, he explained, especially prolonged emotional stress. I nodded silently. If only he knew. When I returned to Rebecca's office with the completed evaluation, she read the report carefully and smiled for the first time. This changes everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something dangerous returning to me. Confidence. Rebecca then gave me instructions that surprised me. Do not confront your son emotionally anymore. Stay calm, stay polite, document everything. That's hard, I know, but emotional reactions will help them more than you. She was right. So I began observing instead of reacting. And once I stopped crying long enough to truly watch Ethan and Vanessa, I noticed things I'd missed before. Expensive things. Desperate things. One afternoon, Vanessa accidentally left a luxury shopping receipt on my kitchen counter after visiting. Nearly $4,000. Shoes, designer handbags, jewelry. Another time Ethan answered a phone call while standing in my driveway. He didn't realize I could hear him through the open garage. I told you I'm handling it, he snapped quietly. Pause. No, we just need more time. Pause again. I know how much we owe. Oh. The word echoed in my mind for hours afterward. A week later, Linda discovered something even worse. Vanessa had been bragging at a dinner party after too much wine. She said once Ethan gets temporary financial authority, things will finally stabilize, Linda told me carefully. Temporary financial authority. Not concern, not caregiving. Money. Rebecca immediately started digging deeper. Within days, she uncovered multiple lawsuits tied to Ethan's struggling investment business. Delinquent loans, credit obligations, missed payments. I felt physically sick reading the reports. My son wasn't trying to protect me. He was drowning, and he had decided I was the life raft. The final piece came unexpectedly. Rebecca called me one evening sounding unusually serious. Christine, she said, I think you need to prepare yourself emotionally. My stomach tightened instantly. What happened? I found property records. What kind of records? The new house. I waited silently. It's only in Vanessa's name. I closed my eyes slowly. Everything suddenly made sense. The expensive lifestyle, the panic, the pressure, the urgency. Ethan had likely poured everything into maintaining a life they could no longer afford, and now they needed mine. That realization broke something inside me. Not because of the money, because I finally understood this had been planned long before they ever questioned my mental health. The accusations came after the financial problems. Not before, meaning my decline was never discovered. It was invented. That night, I sat alone on my back porch wrapped in Richard's old flannel blanket while cold spring wind rustled through the trees. For months I had felt powerless, terrified, humiliated. But now, something had changed. I still loved my son. God help me, I still loved him desperately. But I was no longer confused. And once fear disappears, clarity becomes a very dangerous thing. Before going to bed, I opened the kitchen drawer and looked again at the sealed envelope I had prepared weeks earlier. The envelope Ethan hadn't seen yet. The envelope that could destroy everything he'd built against me. I touched it carefully and whispered into the empty kitchen. You should have just told me the truth. The mediation meeting took place on a gray Monday morning in a downtown office building that smelled faintly of coffee and copier ink. I barely slept the night before. Not because I was afraid of losing, because I was afraid of seeing my son sit across from me like an opponent. There are some heartbreaks age does not prepare you for. Watching your child become a stranger is one of them. Rebecca Sloan met me outside the conference room carrying 2 thick folders and a calm expression that somehow steadied my breathing. "You ready?" she asked gently. No, I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Inside the room sat Ethan Vanessa and attorney Daniel Mercer. Ethan looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tense, fingers tapping nervously against the table. Vanessa, meanwhile, looked perfectly composed in a cream-colored designer suit, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully arranged into something between concern and sadness. Daniel Mercer stood when we entered, tall, silver-haired, controlled, the kind of attorney who had spent years learning how to sound compassionate while dismantling people professionally. "Mrs. Adams," he said politely. I nodded without smiling. The room felt painfully formal. Cold water pitchers, legal pads, muted lighting, no family photographs, no warmth, just paperwork and strategy. Mercer began first. "We appreciate everyone being willing to meet before further court proceedings become necessary." Court proceedings. The phrase alone made my stomach tighten. Rebecca remained calm beside me. "We're here to listen," she replied evenly. Mercer folded his hands. "As everyone understands, Ethan's only concern is ensuring his mother's long-term well-being and financial protection." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because hearing greed wrapped in professional language suddenly sounded absurd. Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, this isn't supposed to be a fight." I looked at him carefully. "Then why does it feel like one?" But I didn't say it aloud. Rebecca had warned me repeatedly. "Stay calm. Stay controlled. Do not give them emotional reactions." Mercer opened a file and began reviewing their concerns. Christine Adams has demonstrated increasing forgetfulness. Christine Adams has shown emotional instability. Christine Adams has experienced social withdrawal. Christine Adams may be vulnerable to financial exploitation. Every sentence felt surreal, as if I were listening to strangers discuss another woman entirely. At one point, Mercer referenced the grocery store incident. Another time, he mentioned the broken pitcher. Then came the cold medicine mistake, each tiny moment inflated into evidence of decline. I sat completely still while my chest burned. Ethan avoided my eyes through most of it. Vanessa, however, watched me constantly, studying me, waiting, probably hoping I would cry or become angry, because reactions had become part of their case. Finally, Mercer slid several papers across the table. "We are requesting temporary financial oversight authority while Mrs. Adams undergoes additional observation." Oversight authority. Such clean language for taking control of someone's life. Rebecca glanced briefly at the documents before setting them aside. And under this arrangement, she asked calmly, "Mr. Adams would gain access to all primary retirement and investment accounts." Mercer nodded smoothly. "Only for protective purposes." Protective. Another poisoned word. Rebecca tilted her head slightly. Protective of whom? For the first time, Mercer's expression tightened slightly. Vanessa jumped in quickly. "This isn't about money." Rebecca looked directly at her. "Then why is financial transfer authority the first request?" Silence. Beautiful silence. I noticed Ethan's fingers tapping faster against the table. Mercer quickly redirected. "Mrs. Adams has become increasingly isolated." I finally spoke. I attend church weekly. I volunteer twice a month at the library. I have active social relationships. Mercer smiled politely. Isolation is sometimes difficult for individuals to recognize in themselves. That sentence nearly broke my composure. Not because it was cruel, because it was designed perfectly. Anything I said could be reframed as confusion or denial. I suddenly understood how elderly people lose control of their lives even when they're completely sane. Not through dramatic breakdowns, through carefully manipulated narratives. Rebecca placed a calming hand lightly near my folder. A silent reminder, stay steady. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice softer this time. Mom, nobody wants to hurt you. I looked at him fully for the first time since entering the room, and suddenly I saw it. Not confidence, fear. Real fear. Something was unraveling behind his performance. Then why does this feel humiliating? I asked quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. You've changed. No, I said softly. I think your circumstances changed. The room became completely silent. Vanessa stiffened immediately. Mercer's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. Rebecca remained expressionless beside me. Ethan blinked. What does that mean? I folded my hands calmly. It means people usually don't destroy their mothers unless they're desperate. Vanessa leaned forward instantly. This is exactly the kind of paranoia we're talking about. There it was again. That word. Paranoia. Rebecca spoke before I could respond. Mrs. Adams is allowed to question sudden legal action involving her finances. Mercer quickly stepped in again. No one is accusing Mrs. Adams of wrongdoing. No, just incompetence, which somehow felt worse. The meeting dragged on for nearly 2 hours. Every few minutes, Mercer returned to the same themes: safety, protection, concern. Meanwhile, Rebecca asked precise questions they clearly weren't expecting. Why was emergency authority necessary? Why had Ethan contacted financial institutions before formal evaluation? Why had Vanessa discussed Christine's mental state publicly before medical assessment? Each question created tiny cracks in their polished story, and Ethan felt it. I could see it. His confidence kept slipping whenever Rebecca pushed too hard. At one point, he actually snapped at Mercer quietly. We talked about this already. Mercer shot him a warning glance immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. Then came the moment that changed the atmosphere completely. Mercer turned toward me directly. Mrs. Adams, would you be willing to voluntarily allow temporary account co-management to reassure your family voluntarily? Such a manipulative word, as if surrender becomes kindness when requested politely enough. I looked down at my purse. Inside sat the sealed envelope, the one Ethan still knew nothing about. For one brief moment, I considered pulling it out right there, ending everything immediately. But Rebecca had advised patience. Not yet. So instead, I answered calmly, No. Mercer blinked. No. I will not surrender control of my finances because my son and daughter-in-law decided aging itself makes me incompetent. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Ethan looked exhausted suddenly. Not angry, tired. Like the weight of maintaining this lie was crushing him slowly. Mercer leaned back in his chair carefully. Mrs. Adams refusing cooperation may unfortunately strengthen concerns about impaired judgment. The cruelty of that sentence stunned even me. If I complied, I proved weakness. If I resisted, I proved instability. The trap was almost elegant. But Rebecca finally moved. She opened her folder slowly and slid one document across the table. Then perhaps we should discuss Dr. Howard Bennett's independent cognitive evaluation. Everything stopped. Completely. Mercer picked up the report carefully. His expression changed almost immediately as he scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. Ethan's face lost color. Vanessa looked confused. "What is that?" she asked sharply. Rebecca answered calmly. "A comprehensive neurological and cognitive assessment completed last week." Mercer kept reading silently. I watched his confidence evaporate in real time. "Mrs. Adams?" he finally said. Carefully, "You already underwent evaluation." "Yes." "Without informing your family, I almost laughed. My family filed legal paperwork questioning my sanity without informing me first." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Mercer continued reading. Then he removed his glasses slowly. The report was devastating for them. Cognitive function excellent. Financial reasoning intact. No evidence of dementia. No impairment detected. No guardianship recommended. For the first time all morning, silence belonged to me instead of them. Ethan stared down at the table. Vanessa looked furious. "And Daniel Mercer." He suddenly looked cautious. Very cautious. Because smart attorneys recognize danger the moment facts stop matching the story they were sold. But despite the small victory, I still kept the envelope hidden inside my purse. Because the medical report was only the beginning. The real bombshell hadn't exploded yet. And deep down, I think Ethan already knew it was coming. After the mediation meeting, something shifted. Not publicly. Publicly, Ethan and Vanessa still pretended this was all about concern and family responsibility, but underneath that polished performance, I could feel panic beginning to spread, especially in Ethan. He stopped calling as often. When he did call, his voice sounded distracted and brittle, like someone constantly waiting for bad news. Vanessa, on the other hand, became colder, more aggressive. Less patient with maintaining the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law act, and Rebecca Sloan noticed it too. "They're under pressure," she told me during one of our meetings. We sat inside her office reviewing financial documents spread across her conference table. Outside the windows, downtown Columbus shimmered under cold spring rain. Rebecca tapped one particular file with her pen. "This is where their story starts falling apart." I looked down at the paperwork. Bank statements, property records, debt notices, business filings, a life collapsing quietly behind luxury furniture and expensive smiles. "You were right," Rebecca said softly. "This was never about your well-being." I stared at the numbers in disbelief. Ethan's investment firm had suffered massive losses over the previous 18 months. Several risky commercial real estate projects had failed. One investor lawsuit alone threatened nearly everything he still owned. On top of that, there were personal loans, credit card balances, late notices, lines of credit opened against future commissions. I covered my mouth slowly. "How bad is it?" Rebecca hesitated. "Bad enough to make someone desperate." That word again? Desperate. I thought about Ethan as a little boy sitting at our kitchen counter doing homework while Richard grilled hamburgers outside. He used to cry when he thought he disappointed people. Now he was trying to legally strip his own mother of financial independence. How does a person travel that far from themselves? Rebecca slid another folder toward me carefully. And there's more. Inside were property records for Ethan and Vanessa's house. The beautiful modern home with imported marble floors and giant windows. The house Vanessa loved showing off. Only her name appeared on the ownership documents, not Ethan's. I frowned immediately. What does that mean? It means if Ethan's finances collapse, Vanessa protects the property. I stared at her. You think she planned that Rebecca chose her words carefully. I think Vanessa is very aware of financial risk. Suddenly, dozens of past conversations replayed differently in my mind. Vanessa asking detailed questions about my savings. Vanessa insisting Ethan needed security. Vanessa constantly steering discussions toward aging and vulnerability. She wasn't frightened for me. She was frightened for herself. And Ethan, I wasn't sure anymore whether he was leading this nightmare or simply drowning inside it. A few days later, Linda called me sounding uneasy. I saw Vanessa yesterday. Where? At the mall. I almost laughed bitterly. Of course. While trying to prove I couldn't safely manage my retirement funds, Vanessa was apparently shopping. She looked upset. Linda continued. I wasn't trying to overhear, but she was arguing on the phone. My chest tightened immediately. What did she say? Linda lowered her voice. She said, if Ethan doesn't get access soon, we're finished. Finished. I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth. Not hidden behind concern anymore. Raw desperation. That night I sat alone in my bedroom holding Richard's wedding band in my palm. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to store it away. Sometimes when life felt too heavy, I held it just to remember who I used to be before grief complicated everything. I kept thinking about something Rebecca said earlier that week. People rarely become manipulative overnight. Usually desperation simply exposes what was already there. Maybe she was right. Maybe Ethan had always carried this weakness inside him, or maybe life had cornered him so completely he stopped recognizing himself. Neither answer brought comfort. The next major revelation came accidentally, or maybe not accidentally. I still don't know. Ethan showed up unexpectedly one evening while I was planting flowers near the front porch. He looked exhausted, pale, his dress shirt wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for 2 days. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I stood slowly. About what inside? For a moment I almost said no, but beneath all my anger, he was still my son. So I let him in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where he used to eat cereal before school every morning. Funny how the same room can hold both your happiest memories and your worst heartbreak. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face heavily. I wish things hadn't gotten this ugly. Then why did you make them ugly? He flinched slightly. I'm trying to protect everyone. No, I said softly. You're trying to survive something. Silence. Long silence. Then he looked at me carefully. You talked to lawyers? Yes. And doctors? Yes. His jaw tightened. You think I'm attacking you? I almost laughed. You filed paperwork questioning my sanity. We weren't going to go through with it completely. That sentence stunned me. What? He looked away. It was supposed to be temporary. Temporary. Such a harmless-sounding word. Temporary control. Temporary oversight. Temporary theft of dignity. How temporary? I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. That told me everything. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and immediately stood up. I have to take this. He walked toward the hallway but didn't realize his voice carried through the house. Not now, Vanessa. Pause. I said, I'm handling it. Longer pause. Then finally, no. You cannot start talking about bankruptcy yet. Bankruptcy. The word hit me like physical force. I sat frozen in my kitchen chair while my own son whispered financial collapse into his phone 10 feet away from me. When he returned, his face looked drained. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I asked quietly, "How bad is it?" He stared at me. "What?" "The debt." His eyes widened slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Stop lying." That came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired. Tired of performances. Tired of manipulation. Tired of watching everyone pretend concern while circling my savings like vultures. "You contacted banks before even filing paperwork," I continued. "You pressured me for account access. Vanessa's panicking. Your business is failing." Ethan stood completely still, and for one brief moment I saw pure fear on his face. Not anger, not defensiveness. Fear. "You've been investigating me." "No," I said quietly. "I've been protecting myself." The shame in his expression almost broke my heart. Almost. Then something even sadder happened. Instead of apologizing, he got angry. "You think you know everything, now I know enough. You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under. There it is. What the truth?" He looked confused. For months I whispered you pretended this was about me. He opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't, because somewhere deep down, even Ethan knew I was right. I stood slowly from the table. "You could have told me the truth." He laughed bitterly. "And what asked you for money?" "Yes." His face hardened instantly. "You wouldn't understand." That sentence cut deeper than he realized. Because after everything Richard and I sacrificed for him, after every overtime shift, every canceled vacation, every sleepless night, my son truly believed I wouldn't help him. And maybe that was the greatest tragedy of all. Not the lawsuit, not the betrayal, the fact that greed had convinced him manipulation was easier than honesty. Before leaving, Ethan paused near the front door. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something important, something real. But then his phone buzzed again. "Vanessa." I recognized the ringtone immediately, and whatever fragile honesty had almost surfaced disappeared from his face completely. By the time the front door closed behind him, I realized something terrifying. This situation was moving toward collapse faster than anyone wanted to admit, and desperate people are most dangerous right before everything falls apart. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Family court should never feel like war, but that morning it did. I sat beside Rebecca Sloan at the long wooden table while people shuffled papers around us. Across the room, Ethan stared down at his hands. Vanessa sat beside him in a perfectly tailored black suit, whispering something urgently into his ear every few minutes. Attorney Daniel Mercer looked far less confident than he had during mediation. That gave me my first real sense that the truth was beginning to crack through their performance. Still, my stomach twisted violently as we waited for Judge Eleanor Pierce to enter. No mother dreams of sitting in court opposite her own child. I kept remembering Ethan at 7 years old, asleep on Richard's chest after falling off his bicycle. And now here we were. Lawyers. Evidence. Accusations. A courtroom full of strangers deciding whether I deserved control over my own life. Judge Pierce entered sharply at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair, intelligent eyes, and the kind of presence that made people stop pretending quickly. Once seated, she reviewed the case file silently for several moments. Then she looked directly at Daniel Mercer. "Proceed." Mercer stood smoothly. "Your Honor." This petition concerns the financial safety and cognitive stability of Mrs. Christine Adams. Hearing my name spoken like a legal problem made my chest ache. Mercer continued carefully. We believe Mrs. Adams is vulnerable due to cognitive decline, emotional instability, and increasing inability to manage financial matters responsibly. Each sentence sounded polished, practiced, dangerously calm. Then came the evidence. Edited recordings, notes, statements from relatives Vanessa had manipulated. Descriptions of ordinary mistakes reframed as mental deterioration. Mercer even referenced the broken pitcher. At one point, he played an audio clip of me sounding frustrated during an argument with Ethan. Out of context, I sounded exhausted and emotional. Exactly what they wanted. Vanessa lowered her eyes dramatically while the recording played, performing sadness. I glanced at Ethan. He looked miserable. Good. Mercer finally concluded by saying, Mr. Adams is simply attempting to protect his mother before irreversible harm occurs. Protect. Such a beautiful word when used honestly. Such a disgusting word when weaponized. Judge Pierce turned toward Rebecca. Counsel Rebecca stood calmly. Your Honor, the petitioner's case relies almost entirely on subjective interpretation and manipulated context. Mercer objected immediately. Manipulated is a serious accusation. Rebecca didn't even look at him. Then let's discuss facts. She handed several documents to the court clerk. These are independent neurological and cognitive evaluations conducted by Dr. Howard Bennett, a licensed specialist with no personal relationship to either party. Judge Pierce reviewed the documents carefully. The room became completely silent. Then she looked up. Dr. Bennett concludes, Mrs. Adams demonstrates excellent cognitive function. Mercer's jaw tightened slightly. Rebecca continued. No evidence of dementia. No evidence of impairment. No evidence supporting conservatorship. For the first time all morning, the atmosphere shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Judge Pierce leaned back thoughtfully. Mr. Mercer, did your clients know about this evaluation before today? Mercer hesitated. That hesitation said everything. No, Your Honor. Interesting. Very interesting. Judge Pierce turned toward Ethan directly. Mr. Adams, if your concern was truly cognitive decline, why did you not request independent medical assessment before filing legal action? Ethan swallowed hard. We were trying to act quickly, because desperation rarely likes delays. Mercer attempted to recover immediately. Cognitive decline can fluctuate. Rebecca interrupted smoothly. Your Honor, there's another issue the court should consider. I felt my pulse spike instantly. This was it. The moment. Rebecca reached into her folder slowly. The petitioner failed to disclose substantial financial distress. Ethan's face went white. Vanessa stopped breathing for a second. Mercer turned sharply toward them both. What financial distress, he truly hadn't known. That realization electrified the room. Rebecca calmly submitted additional documents. Business debt records, loan defaults, pending civil claims. Judge Pierce reviewed them carefully while silence swallowed the courtroom. Then she looked directly at Ethan. You are currently facing serious financial liabilities. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. It's temporary. Temporary. There was that word again. Rebecca stepped forward. And despite those liabilities, Mr. Adams sought immediate access to his mother's retirement and investment accounts. Mercer looked furious now. Not at us. At Ethan. Because attorneys hate surprises. especially surprises capable of destroying credibility. Vanessa suddenly spoke up. This has nothing to do with money. Rebecca turned toward her calmly. Really? Then she looked at me. I knew what came next. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my purse. The sealed envelope. The same envelope I placed on my kitchen table the day Ethan arrived with legal papers. The envelope I had protected for weeks. The envelope that could end everything. I handed it carefully to Rebecca. She opened it slowly and removed a flash drive. Mercer frowned immediately. What is this? Rebecca answered calmly. A recorded conversation. Vanessa stiffened instantly. Pure panic flashed across her face before she could hide it. That alone told the judge plenty. Judge Pierce nodded toward the clerk. Play it. The audio filled the courtroom seconds later. At first, the sound quality crackled softly. Then Vanessa's voice became unmistakably clear. If Ethan gets temporary control of the accounts, we can stabilize everything before anyone notices. My stomach twisted hearing it aloud. Then another voice. Linda's. You're talking about Christine's retirement money. Vanessa laughed lightly. Oh, please, it's not like she's spending it. The courtroom went completely still. Then came the sentence that destroyed everything. She's old. Ethan's entitled to it eventually anyway. I heard someone inhale sharply behind us. Vanessa's face drained of all color. Ethan looked physically sick. Mercer slowly closed his eyes for one long second, because now the truth had shape. Greed, intent, planning, manipulation. The recording continued. Vanessa discussing debt, the house, the lawsuits, pressure on Ethan, and finally, we just need control long enough to recover financially. Rebecca stopped the recording there. Silence exploded across the courtroom louder than shouting. Judge Pierce removed her glasses slowly, then she looked directly at Vanessa. Did you make these statements? Vanessa stammered immediately. They were taken out of context. The irony nearly made me laugh. Out of context. Exactly how they had treated my entire life for months. Judge Pierce looked unimpressed. Mercer finally stood. Your Honor, I was not informed of this recording or the extent of my client's financial liabilities. Translation. My own clients lied to me. Ethan looked utterly broken now. Not angry, not defensive, broken. And for one terrible moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered every sleepless night, every humiliation, every whisper at church, every moment they made me question my own mind. Judge Pierce turned toward me gently. Mrs. Adams, did you know about this plan before the petition was filed? I looked directly at Ethan before answering. Yes. The courtroom stayed silent. I realized months ago they were documenting me instead of helping me, so I began documenting them too. Judge Pierce nodded slowly. Smart woman. She understood exactly what had happened here. This wasn't a concerned son protecting an aging mother. This was financial desperation disguised as caregiving. Finally, the judge spoke words I will never forget. This court takes false competency allegations extremely seriously. Ethan lowered his head completely. Vanessa looked close to panic. And Daniel Mercer. He looked like a man mentally calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster. But the strangest feeling inside me wasn't victory, it was grief. Because even while watching the lies collapse around them, even while hearing the truth finally spoken aloud, part of me still wanted my son to stand up and say, I'm sorry, Mom. He never did. After the recording ended, nobody in the courtroom moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The silence carried a different weight now. Before it had been the silence of accusation. Now, it was the silence of exposure. Judge Eleanor Pierce sat perfectly still behind the bench reading through the documents Rebecca had submitted while Vanessa stared ahead like someone trying desperately not to panic publicly. Ethan looked hollow. Not angry, not defensive, just hollow. Attorney Daniel Mercer finally cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I would like a brief recess to speak privately with my clients." Judge Pierce's expression remained cold. "You may have 10 minutes. The second the judge stepped out, the room exploded into whispers. Mercer turned toward Ethan so fast his chair nearly scraped sideways. "You withheld critical financial information from me!" Ethan opened his mouth. Mercer cut him off immediately. "You told me this was purely a competency concern." Vanessa jumped in. "It is a competency concern!" No, Mercer snapped sharply. "Not anymore." That startled everyone, especially Ethan. Until that moment, Mercer had maintained professional calm no matter how ugly things became. But now even he looked furious. Because smart attorneys understand one thing very clearly: courts do not tolerate manipulation involving elderly people, especially when money is involved. Mercer lowered his voice, but not enough to stop Rebecca and me from hearing pieces of it. "You failed to disclose debt exposure." Pause. "You failed to disclose pending financial liabilities." Another pause. "And you absolutely failed to disclose that recording." Vanessa folded her arms defensively. "She recorded us illegally." Rebecca finally spoke. "The recording was made by Linda Carter during a conversation she participated in. Under Ohio law, one-party consent applies." Mercer closed his eyes briefly. Game over. He knew it too. Across the room, Ethan looked physically ill. I watched him rub both hands over his face while Vanessa whispered angrily beside him. At one point she hissed, "You said she didn't know." That sentence pierced straight through me. Not because it surprised me, because hearing the cruelty spoken openly still hurt. Ethan answered quietly. "She wasn't supposed to. Wasn't supposed to." As if awareness itself had become inconvenient. I suddenly realized something heartbreaking. Neither of them ever truly saw me as a person during this process, only as a problem to manage, a financial obstacle standing between them and survival. When Judge Pierce returned, the atmosphere had changed completely. Even the court clerk looked uncomfortable now. The judge sat down and folded her hands carefully. "I've reviewed the evidence." Nobody spoke. She looked directly at Ethan first. "Mr. Adams' filing for conservatorship over a competent adult is an extremely serious legal action." Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Pierce's voice sharpened slightly. "Especially when financial motives may exist." Vanessa looked down immediately. The judge continued. "The court finds the independent medical evaluation highly persuasive." She glanced toward me briefly. "There appears to be no credible evidence of cognitive impairment." I felt something inside my chest loosen for the first time in months. Not triumph. Relief. Pure relief. Because no matter how strong you try to remain, constant accusations slowly poison your confidence. Part of me had started fearing the world would eventually believe them. Judge Pierce continued reading from her notes. "The petitioner's evidence relies heavily on subjective interpretation of ordinary events." She paused. "However, the court is deeply troubled by the recorded statements regarding financial motivation." Mercer lowered his head slightly. Even he looked embarrassed now. Then came the sentence that shattered Ethan completely. "This petition is dismissed effective immediately." Vanessa inhaled sharply. Ethan closed his eyes. "And I felt absolutely nothing at first. No joy, no victory, just exhaustion. The kind that settles deep into your bones after surviving something you never imagined your own family capable of doing." But Judge Pierce wasn't finished. She turned toward Ethan again. "Mr. Adams, caring for aging parents is difficult. Financial stress is difficult. But neither circumstance justifies stripping a competent adult of autonomy through misleading claims." Ethan's voice cracked when he answered. "I understand. No." He understood consequences. That wasn't the same thing. Then the judge looked toward Vanessa. "Mrs. Adams, your recorded statements strongly suggest financial intent rather than concern for Mrs. Adams's welfare." Vanessa immediately tried recovering. "I was frustrated. I didn't mean." Judge Pierce raised one hand slightly. "Intent matters. Words matter, especially in cases involving elderly individuals." Vanessa finally fell silent. For the first time since I met her, she looked genuinely afraid. Not socially embarrassed. Afraid, and honestly, part of me hated that I took comfort in it. Court adjourned shortly afterward. People began gathering documents quietly, while the tension in the room remained thick enough to touch. Mercer packed his briefcase quickly without speaking much to Ethan or Vanessa. That alone told me everything. He wanted distance, legal distance, professional distance, moral distance. Rebecca squeezed my arm gently. "You did well." I nodded weakly, but emotionally I felt numb, because surviving betrayal does not feel empowering in the moment. It feels devastating. As we stood to leave, Ethan finally approached me alone. Vanessa stayed near the doorway, speaking urgently with Mercer. My son stopped several feet away from me like he no longer knew what distance was appropriate. "Mom." Just hearing the word nearly broke me. For months he'd spoken to me like a legal issue. Now suddenly I was mom again. I waited silently. Ethan's eyes were red. I never wanted it to go this far. I stared at him. How far exactly did you think accusing me of mental incompetence would go? He looked down immediately. "That's not how I saw it." "No," I whispered. "You saw paperwork, strategy, solutions." He flinched. And somewhere along the way, I continued softly, "You stopped seeing me." That finally cracked him. Tears filled his eyes instantly. I was drowning. There it was. The truth. Not legal language. Not manipulation. Just truth. I know I said quietly. He looked shocked. "I knew long before court." "Then why didn't you say anything?" I almost laughed through my sadness. "Why didn't you?" That question destroyed him more than anger ever could, because we both knew the answer. Pride, shame, greed, fear. A terrible mixture of all four. Vanessa suddenly approached us quickly. "We should go." Her voice sounded tense, brittle. Ethan didn't move. She knew about everything. Vanessa whispered sharply. "I know. We need to leave." Something cold passed across Ethan's face then. Not love. Not partnership. Resentment. Maybe for the first time he fully saw how far Vanessa had pushed things. Or maybe he was finally forced to admit how willingly he'd followed. Either way, something between them looked damaged now. Vanessa noticed it too, and she panicked. "I was trying to protect us," she said quietly. Yes, interesting choice of word. Not him. Not family. Us. Ethan stepped back slowly from both of us. I can't do this right now. Then he walked away down the courthouse hallway alone. Vanessa stared after him in disbelief before hurrying behind him in high heels, clicking sharply across the marble floor. I watched them disappear together. Or maybe not together anymore. Rebecca touched my shoulder gently. Are you all right? I looked down at my trembling hands. No, I answered honestly, because winning against your own child never feels clean. Outside the courthouse, cold wind swept through downtown Columbus, while reporters from a local legal news blog lingered near the steps hoping for comments. Rebecca handled them quickly. I stayed silent. I had no desire to publicly humiliate Ethan further. Despite everything, I still loved him. That was the hardest part. Love does not disappear just because trust does. As Rebecca drove me home, exhaustion finally crashed into me fully. I leaned my head against the car window, watching blurred city lights pass by. Then quietly, almost to myself, I whispered, I think I lost my son. Rebecca glanced at me sadly before answering. No. I looked at her. You lost the version of him that stopped being honest. And somehow, that hurt even more. The strangest part about surviving something painful is how ordinary life looks afterward. The sun still rises, neighbors still mow their lawns, grocery stores still play soft music over the speakers while people compare cereal prices. Meanwhile, your entire understanding of family has changed forever. 3 weeks after the court hearing, my house felt quieter than it ever had before. Not lonely, just honest. For the first time in months, nobody was questioning my memory. Nobody was watching my reactions. Nobody was secretly documenting my mistakes. The silence no longer felt threatening. It felt peaceful. I started sleeping again. Really sleeping. Not the shallow, restless kind filled with anxiety and replayed conversations, but deep sleep that lets your body finally unclench after surviving fear too long. Every morning I sat on the porch with coffee and listened to birds in the maple tree Richard planted decades earlier. Life had not returned to normal, but it had stopped feeling like war. Rebecca helped me restructure everything legally after the case ended. New financial protections, updated estate documents, additional safeguards requiring multiple professional reviews before any future conservatorship attempt could proceed. At first, signing those papers made me feel sad. Then I realized something important. Protecting yourself is not bitterness. It is wisdom, especially after betrayal. Linda visited often during those weeks. One afternoon, we sat together in my kitchen eating chicken salad sandwiches while rain tapped softly against the windows. You seem lighter, she observed gently. I smiled faintly. I think I finally stopped feeling crazy. Linda reached across the table immediately. You were never crazy. I know that now. And I did. But emotional manipulation leaves fingerprints long after it ends. Even after the court dismissed everything, I still caught myself second-guessing harmless things. Misplacing my reading glasses, forgetting why I entered a room, losing track of a conversation briefly. Ordinary human moments had become emotionally loaded. That's what people never talk about. False accusations don't just attack your reputation. They attack your relationship with yourself. A week later, Ethan called. I stared at the phone ringing across my kitchen counter for nearly a full minute before answering. Hello, silence. Then finally, Mom. His voice sounded exhausted. Not polished anymore. Not defensive. Just tired. What do you need, Ethan? The question came out colder than I intended. But maybe honesty sometimes sounds cold after too much pain. I wanted to see you. I closed my eyes briefly. Why another silence? Then quietly, because I miss my mother. That sentence nearly shattered me. Not because it fixed anything, because some broken parts of love never stop responding. We agreed to meet the following Sunday afternoon, not at his house, not in public, at the cemetery, Richard's cemetery. I arrived early carrying fresh white roses. The spring air felt cool and damp, while wind moved softly through the trees around the hillside graves. Richard's headstone still took my breath away sometimes. Richard Adams, beloved husband and father. Father. The word felt heavier now. When Ethan finally arrived, I barely recognized him. He looked thinner, older somehow, like guilt had been eating him from the inside. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan quietly placed flowers beside Richard's grave. I'm sorry, he whispered. At first, I thought he meant to Richard. Then I realized he meant both of us. I folded my arms tightly against the cold wind. Why did you really do it? He stared at the headstone for a long time before answering. I was scared. That's not enough. I know. He swallowed hard. The business started collapsing last year. Investors pulled out. Lawsuits started piling up. Vanessa kept saying we just needed time to recover financially. There was shame all over his face now. Not courtroom shame. Real shame. I thought if I could temporarily control the accounts, I could fix everything before you ever got hurt. I stared at him in disbelief. You convinced yourself stealing from me was protecting me. His eyes filled instantly. When you say it like that, how else should I say it? He broke then. Completely. Tears streamed down his face while he stood beside his father's grave, looking like a lost child instead of a 42-year-old man. I hate what I became, he whispered. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed him. Not because excuses erase betrayal, but because genuine regret sounds different from manipulation. There's no performance in it. No strategy, just grief. We stood there quietly for several minutes while wind moved through the cemetery trees. Finally, I reached into my purse and removed a folded envelope. Ethan frowned slightly. What's that? Something your father wrote before he died? His face changed immediately. Richard had written several private letters during hospice care. One for me, one for Ethan, one for future grandchildren he knew he might never meet. I had kept Ethan's letter hidden for years because Richard wanted him to receive it when life becomes difficult enough to understand it. I handed it over silently. Ethan opened it with trembling hands. As he read, tears began falling again. I already knew every word inside because Richard had once read it aloud to me privately. A man's character is revealed most clearly when fear and money enter the room. If you ever become desperate, tell the truth before desperation teaches you to lie. And remember this, son, no amount of financial success is worth losing the ability to look your family in the eyes honestly. Ethan covered his mouth while reading the final lines. Your mother spent her whole life protecting this family. When I'm gone, make sure nobody, including you, becomes the reason she feels unsafe. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan whispered I failed him. I shook my head slowly. No. He looked at me confused. You failed yourself. That hurt him more. I could see it, because deep down, Ethan already knew it was true. Eventually, he asked the question I think had been haunting him since court. "Can you ever forgive me?" I answered honestly. "Yes," hope flashed briefly across his face. Then I continued. "But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing." His shoulders lowered slowly. "I understand." And maybe he finally did. Before leaving, Ethan hugged me carefully. Not confidently, not automatically, like someone afraid love might no longer belong to him. I hugged him back anyway, because despite everything, he was still my son. But this time I held boundaries too, and that changed everything. As I drove home from the cemetery that afternoon, sunlight finally broke through heavy clouds for the first time all day. I realized then that healing does not happen when pain disappears. Healing begins when truth finally arrives. And the truth was simple. The most valuable thing Richard left our family was never money. It was integrity, and losing that nearly destroyed us all. After everything that happened, I learned something I hope you never forget. Growing older does not make you weak, and protecting yourself does not make you cruel. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people we love most, especially when fear and money begin controlling their choices. But even then, dignity matters, truth matters, boundaries matter, and forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean pretending the pain never happened. It means refusing to let bitterness become the final chapter of your story. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my position, could you ever forgive Ethan? Have you ever experienced betrayal inside your own family? Share your story in the comments because someone reading it may need those words today. And if this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more emotional family stories like this one. Wherever you are in the world tonight, thank you for spending this time with me.